Behoort nou live te wees.
Ek sal refresh, maar ek sien niks nie. Yes.
Het jy klank?
Facebook is live.
Praat oor die klank.
That's it. Like my looks like we're live. Check 1, 2, 3. All right. So it's up albei. We're on both.
Nog nie op YouTube nie.
No, it is. I just checked. Yes.
Okay.
Hello everyone. So thank you for tuning into this live stream. I usually do live streams in Afrikaans, but as you probably know by now, we switch between the languages in Afrikaans and English, and I'm going to do this one in English because you can watch this stream either on Facebook or on YouTube, and our YouTube channel is predominantly in English because it's predominantly aimed at an international audience. So I'm sitting in our studio. We've been recording podcasts the whole morning, and we among others recorded some podcasts about where we are, what's the state of affairs in South Africa, about the tariffs that were announced by President Donald Trump, the strange reaction by the South African government, and also what we believe ought to be done. And I'm going to say something about that now because it's a big deal. But I want to talk a bit more broadly. So there are a few things that I want to discuss with you in this live stream. I want to talk about the tariffs situation, what is happening, what has happened, what could happen, and most importantly, what should happen. And then I want to talk about this upcoming visit of ours to the United States later this month. We have some big plans ahead, plans that are currently unfolding. And I think it's important for us to make sure that you are updated about that. Some big events that we have lined up. And then I want to make some broad concluding remarks about Lex Libertas, about where we are as an institution and what we intend to do. And this is something that I know some people have been waiting for, asking us to give some more context about what is the plan. And so I want to talk about that today. I want to talk about what is the plan. And so if you're watching, just give us a thumbs up, an indication either on YouTube or on Facebook, that you can hear us, that you can see us, and let us know what you think in the comments. And I'll respond to the comments after this live stream. So please, we'd like to hear from you. I don't have a written speech. I have some notes here that I want to use, that I want to talk from. And so those are the points. I want to say something about the tariff situation. I want to talk about this upcoming visit to the United States, and then especially, okay, just I see there are some sound issues. Was it completely silent or was it
Soft sound.
okay, I hear there, I see that. Lift the volume quickly.
Wel, ek kan jou hoor, is net sag. Ek net gecheck wat aangaan.
Okay, so shall we just carry on? We'll just see if we can lift the input volume. So just give us a moment on that. Dalk op die bord.
Nee, hy gee die klank van 'n ander source af en van 'n rede.
Okay. This is, by the way, the first time we're doing a live stream like this in this studio. So I'm sure that if there are some snags, we'll sort it out. Okay, I'll carry on, and then if people can hear at least, then we'll see if we can lift the audio a little bit. But if people can hear, kan ek net hoor, Marie-Louise, kan mense ten minste hoor?
Ek kan sê dit is baie sag. So dalk is hy.
Okay, can you just let us know in the audio in the comments if
Hy voer in van daai mic af net dan. Nee.
if you can hear, if you can't hear anything, in which case we'll start over, or if it's just soft, then we can continue.
It says for fine K670 microphone. So let me just see if I can change that.
Hulle sê die ander hulle hoor jou beter as ons.
Ja.
Hier daai
Die klank kom hier
so,
deur.
kan ons nie hierdie klank. Okay, ek sien. Okay.
It's not ideal, but
Okay, we got the problem. The sound was coming from this microphone. All right. It should be better now. Shall we start over then? Okay, I'll just do a quick reintroduction. Apologies about that. So we're doing this stream in English. We usually stream in Afrikaans, but this is also for YouTube, and the YouTube channel is primarily in English. And I want to talk about where we are and the way forward. And there are a few points that I want to discuss. Thank you. I see the comments coming in. So I can actually see the comments from here. Let me just hold this closer. Turn up the volume. Yes, okay. Perfect now. Thank you. Volume is better. Thank you, all of that. Thank you for all the support. A lot of people watching currently. Thank you for that. I'll keep an eye as I speak. We want to talk about the tariff situation. We want to talk about the upcoming trip to the United States and this campaign of ours, the Truth Be Told campaign, and also this report that we intend to publish. And then I want to talk to you about the plan, our plan at Lex Libertas. And we've had some people ask about that, saying, we hear what you're saying about this particular issue and that particular issue, but what is sort of the bigger picture plan? And I want to talk about that today. Now, I mentioned that we did record some podcasts this morning, the whole morning actually, and we're going to start publishing them tomorrow and in the weeks to follow, in which we discuss many of these issues in more detail. But I want to give you a quick overview, and I want to encourage you obviously to watch these episodes as they come out, because I will elaborate in those episodes more than what I'm about to say today. So let's start with the tariffs. Now, I'm sure you all know by now that President Donald Trump has announced a 30% tariff for all South African exports entering the United States, and then also an additional 10% for countries, as he said, aligned with the anti-American BRICS policies. Now, this was announced while this BRICS summit was going on. And this is effectively the end of the AGOA agreement. Of course, the agreement through which South Africa has been trading with the United States, and through which South Africa has had several advantages in terms of trading, or benefits in terms of trading with the United States. And it was very predictable that this was going to happen. Not just due to the fact that President Trump has said that this is going to happen a few months ago, but also it was quite clear from what the AGOA agreement states and what is happening in South Africa. And the AGOA agreement is good for South Africa, or was good for South Africa, in the sense that it's easier for us to trade, export, and so forth. But the AGOA agreement also states that in order to trade, the parties to the agreement need to protect property rights, and they need to ensure that freedom in the market is protected and is encouraged. So the free market should be promoted. And South Africa is doing neither of these two. So South Africa has been in breach of the AGOA agreement increasingly. And so this we knew that this was coming. What is more concerning is that the South African government has done very little to mitigate this, or virtually nothing to prevent this from happening. And so we saw this infamous meeting in the White House, and there's something, I'm sure you all saw that meeting, but there's something about the White House meeting that I think is very important, that should be understood, which is that South Africa has a multiplicity of crises, and I'm going to get to that now, but it's very clear from what was discussed in the White House meeting that President Ramaphosa, there we go, some people are saying escalating political crisis in South Africa. And it's important to remember, to bear in mind that the economic crisis and the political crisis are two different crises, even though they are interconnected. But the approach of President Ramaphosa and the ANC and the South African government has been, and still seems to be, that the political crisis is either non-existent or irrelevant, and that the only thing that we should talk about is the economic crisis. But even when talking about the economic crisis, there's this strange double-speak, in the sense that, in a certain sense, they want to deny the existence of the economic crisis because they want to convey to the world that they are a good government. But on the other hand, they need to talk about the economic crisis because they need money and they want more investment and so forth. And so Ramaphosa's line at this White House meeting was that the political crisis would resolve itself if the economic crisis is resolved. And more explicitly, the political crisis is either irrelevant or it would go away if America gives South Africa money. when the truth is the other way around. The truth is that the economic crisis in South Africa is largely a consequence of the political crisis. And that is what the American government was talking about. And when we talk about the political crisis, we mean this very destructive policy framework in South Africa, including the BEE laws, the race laws, and also, the hate speech, the kill the word chants, the farm murders, the government's reaction to the farm murders, the hatred and contempt for minority communities, and so forth. And so that's one thing. And then the other is what we have spoken about a little bit is the very alarming reaction to that White House meeting, with people really trying very hard to pretend that there's no problem in South Africa, that the videos played, and this is really what was said, the videos played by President Trump were deep fake videos, that it was not true, and all of these things. And you might have seen some of these remarks. And this is why we announced the Truth Be Told campaign at Lex Libertas, to say that the talk about the crisis in South Africa should happen on two levels. On the one level, we should talk about the statistics, about the data, the numbers, the facts. And this is a very important part of the crisis, and it is something that has to be addressed. And we need to participate in that. We need to make sure that there are accurate statistics out there, that we use conservative numbers. In other words, we cannot be accused of exaggerating and so forth. And this is important, and we need to say more about this. But there is something else that is just as important and that has been more neglected, and that is the extent to which people's personal stories have not been told, have not come out. And that is something that we intend to address. Just hold on one second. I see there are some comments coming in also about the volume. I don't think it's picking up the volume from the audio from the laptop. We are aware of that, but we can't change it right now without doing the stream over. So we'll continue if you can hear us. Is it? Okay. Okay, Facebook was cut off for some reason, but we'll carry on with this discussion on YouTube. As I said, that volume is still okay. Thank you. That we will be publishing more about this tomorrow and so forth. And so a problem with the current discussion is that the personal stories have completely fallen by the wayside. And so we announced this campaign where we encouraged people to send us their testimonies, their personal stories, so that we can collect it in the form of a bundle. And very quickly, we have gotten, like within a few days after announcing this, about 150. And currently we have more than 200 stories that people have sent to us about their experiences. And that includes experiences in terms of farm attacks, experiences in terms of land invasions, property rights being targeted, experiences in terms of racial exclusion as a result of the race laws, and experiences also as a result of government collapse. Now, this campaign is a campaign that we will push through in the weeks and months and probably years ahead. So we're currently verifying all of these cases, and we have decided to publish a first version of this report, like a preliminary report, very soon, as in within the next 2 weeks, which we will take to the United States during this trip, and I'll say something more about that in a moment. But we are going to continue to update this. So it's going to be something like a living document that's going to be updated increasingly. And I want to encourage you, there is still time. If you have a story to share about these categories that I mentioned, please write to us. You can do so on the Lex Libertas website. Through the website, you will see there is a link, Truth Be Told. In Afrikaans, it's Die Waarheid Moet Uit. And send us your concerns, your stories, and you will see that we will follow up with you. We need information in terms of who you are, where you live, what has happened, when did it happen. If you can, a case number, and if you can, media reports about the story. And we will verify all of that. We have gotten quite a few from people who have preferred to remain anonymous, which we respect. and we will treat it as such. But also, I want to say that it is important, at least for some people, which fortunately we have, who are willing to speak publicly, to be a voice for the voiceless. And we've had some progress or in terms of this campaign since announcing it already at least on 3 levels. The one is an American journalist who came to South Africa very recently to investigate what is happening, who reached out to us as a result of this campaign, who has spoken with some of the victims. And that's very important for obvious reasons, to get people to tell their own story so that we don't tell it merely on their behalf, but if we can, get them to speak for themselves. Another is I was recently on a very short trip to England where I spoke, among others, with several platforms and meetings, among others with Ayaan Hirsi Ali, who I'm sure you know. If you don't know, please look her up and follow her work. It was also as a result of this campaign, and so we were able to discuss that on her podcast, which will be published soon. And the other is, just last night I got a message from a very influential person in Washington, D.C., a journalist, who said that they have taken note of this campaign and they want to talk to us about this, about the story. So we are very happy that this campaign is making progress, even though it hasn't really been kicked off yet. So my colleague, Marie-Louise Denason, is finalizing the report, which will be the first version of the report. It would not include all 200 stories. It would include some of them, which we need to take with us in 2 weeks to Washington, D.C., and to other people in the U.S. And again, I'll say something about the U.S. in a moment. And from there, we're going to keep updating it. And it'll be on the website. It'll be available to talk for journalists and people who are willing to talk about this. And we're going to reach out to you. So please help us to make sure that this is as full and as comprehensive as we can make it. And then the other part is that we intend to, when we go to the United States in 2 weeks from now, even I think less than 2 weeks, a week and a half, we're going to take 2 reports with us. The one is the one I just discussed, this Truth Be Told report with personal stories and testimonies about what's happening in South Africa. And then the other is, you could say, the more political side of it. It is a report which we are hopefully finalizing today. And we recorded some podcasts discussing this this morning, which we will publish soon, and we will publish this report very soon. The report is about the crisis in South Africa, making sense of the crisis, and then what we believe ought to be done. Now, it has taken quite some time to write this report, partly because we have written so much. It's probably 60 or 70 pages up to now, research with source references and so forth. And we have now gotten to the point where we are shortening it. We have shortened it. It's currently about 10 pages. So there will be a short version, because we don't want to give someone with limited time a document of 70 pages to read. It needs to be short and to the point. But the longer version will also be published. For now, we're working on finalizing the short version. And as far as the short version is concerned, again, it will be published soon. But in terms of the broad outline, we do make the point that there is a threefold crisis in South Africa. The first is just general state failure, or government collapse, not being able to deliver basic services, water, electricity, the collapse of public enterprises, and so forth. All of it properly researched and documented with source references and all of that. That's the first side of the crisis. The second is the destructive policy environment. And we've said at Lex Libertas that the ship is headed in the wrong direction. And this includes destructive laws, BEE laws. It includes things such as the Bella Act, National Health Insurance, and there are many, many, many examples. Skater employment, all of these things that you know very well. And then there's a third dynamic to the crisis in South Africa, which is the persecution of minorities. So on the one hand, the state is collapsing. On the other hand, there's a policy environment that is just bad for everyone. And then thirdly, there is a very particular targeting of minority communities in South Africa by the government. And again, I'm sure I don't have to convince you, the viewer, of this, but this manifests in a variety of ways, including the more than 140 race laws, including the Expropriation Act targeted at expropriating private property, and the fact that many people in the ANC or the government have made it clear that they regard this as a race-based law. They want to target the property belonging to white people. They've made this very clear throughout the last few years, and so forth. Then we haven't even gotten to the hate speech, the chanting of Kill the Boer, the fact that these people are protected not just by politicians but by the justice system, and so forth. So in a certain sense, understanding what's happening in South Africa is a threefold crisis. That's basically the first half of the report, sort of giving an overview of each of these. And then we talk about the fact that many of these minorities in South Africa, especially the Afrikaners, are an indigenous community to South Africa. We've been in South Africa for hundreds of years. We became a people in South Africa. Our language, our culture was developed here. So it's not simply the type of problem that you can solve by giving people a new home in another country. Some people want to do that, but the vast majority would like a solution here in South Africa, and we have a right to a solution here in South Africa. And then comes the contentious point. And this is something that we will be talking about a lot in the months to follow, especially during this upcoming trip, but after this trip as well. We're going to host conferences about this and so forth. And that is the question of international political intervention. Because in the international law, there is a very well-established policy or principle of state sovereignty, and that effectively means that states or governments have sovereignty over their own territories, and that countries cannot prescribe to each other how they should govern. They cannot intervene or mingle in each other's affairs. What happens within South Africa, within the South African territory, and within the judicial territory of the South African government is a matter for the South African government and not for other countries. And this is a well-established international principle. But there are also other well-established international principles, including things such as what has been described as the responsibility to protect and so forth, that says that the nations that are part of the United Nations and the nations of the world also have a responsibility toward each other as states, but also toward the people living within those states. Because as we have seen, especially in the 20th century, there have been some very grotesque examples of people being persecuted by their governments, people being targeted by their governments and so forth. And when that happens, as for example what happened in Rwanda, and there are many examples all over the world, Cambodia, Zimbabwe, you could add Cuba and all these others. The international community cannot simply sit back and say, well, because of territorial sovereignty, there is nothing that we can do. So there is a certain threshold that could be crossed in terms of persecution of people, targeting people, actively discriminating against them in ways that is just not justifiable. But not just that, also in terms of just government collapse, including aspects such as when the government isn't able to provide water or electricity or fulfill its most basic services. There is a certain threshold when it becomes not only justifiable but necessary for the international community to take a stance and say this has to stop. And we're going to apply pressure on this particular government to address this problem. And I believe, and we argue this in this report that we will publish very soon, that South Africa has crossed that point, that we are now at the point where the international community should take a firm stance about or with regard to what is happening in South Africa. And now the question is, what should that stance be, or what should happen in South Africa? And in a certain sense, you could say that there should be intervention on a micro and a macro level. And I'll explain what I mean by that. Firstly, there are I mentioned the destructive policy framework in South Africa. And that includes a variety of aspects, and we don't need to go into the detail of that. I mentioned National Health Insurance, the Bella Act, Expropriation Act, the race laws, all of these things. And the underlying problem is that all of these things have the consequence of eroding, or not just eroding, destroying freedom in South Africa. And this has to stop. So certain preconditions should be set in terms of a basic policy framework in South Africa that protects the basic freedoms of the peoples and communities that live here. That includes recognizing people for their cultural diversity. It includes recognizing them for who they are, respecting them for who they are, which is what we're not seeing in South Africa at the moment. But it also includes giving people the freedom to organize their lives as they see fit. So this is some changes that have to happen within the current, you could say, system, or within the current policy framework. But then the other side of this is the more macro side of the crisis. And that is, I believe, the more important side of what ought to be done. And that is to recognize first and foremost that it's not that simple to fix what is happening in South Africa just from a policy perspective, or to try to fix it from within, or to try to fix it by instituting certain laws and policies and so forth. Yes, laws can be less destructive, but a significant part of the problem in South Africa is the political system. And in theory, the system might look good, but in practice, the system facilitates the things that we see happening in South Africa right now. And so that is why at Lex Libertas, our main point and focus is to say that South Africa needs a more viable, a more sustainable political dispensation. And by this, we mean that the South African political system has to be decentralized, that the national government has much less authority, and that governments that are closer to the people, and that could take many forms, and we can talk about that, it should be closer to the people, and it should have more authority. People, or the communities, or the nations living within South Africa should have more autonomy over their own affairs. And that's not too much to ask. That is, once again, a very basic, well-established international principle, the principle of autonomy over your own affairs. And we don't have that in South Africa, and we've gotten used to not having that. And that is why, or at least one of the very big reasons why we are in this mess at the moment. And so this is something that we need to work towards. And so we will be talking more about this once the report is published, and we will publish the report for you to read. We're going to talk about that. We also think about doing some form of an audio version for the report, or at least a video version, so that if you don't want to read the document, you can listen to it. You can listen to it, or you can watch the video and so forth. Then, and we'll get to that. So I want to conclude then with some remarks about the sort of bigger picture plan for Lex Libertas, and we've had some people ask about this. And again, we recorded a podcast today that we're going to publish tomorrow that goes into this into more detail. It'll be on this YouTube channel. But broadly speaking, there are 5 things that we need to do. And each of these 5 by itself would not achieve much, but it is our view that combining these 5 in such a way that they become an interconnected whole, and in such a way that they strengthen each other, we believe that we can have a significant impact. And so the first of these 5 is to create de facto realities in South Africa where people take control over their own affairs. And when I say create, I mean, I include by that supporting the various institutions that are already doing that. Just taking, for example, we've had many examples of this in the past, taking control of our own safety and so forth. And these are things that have to happen in South Africa, and there are institutions doing this, doing fantastic work, and they have to be supported. But this is one aspect of this. It's just creating a particular reality in South Africa where we take control of our own affairs. Another aspect is creative and imaginative research on macro political solutions. And when I say creative and imaginative, I don't mean utopian philosophies. I mean, we need to break free of this barrier of thinking that you can either have ANC government or you can have apartheid, and there's nothing else than that, because you can have many other things that is not apartheid and that is not ANC government. And we need to publish documents on this, on how to make it practical, so that we can see and we can show to people that it has worked. There are many places in the world where many of these models have been tested, We can see which have failed and which have succeeded, and we can also see to what extent could they be implemented in South Africa. That's the second part. The third part is to raise support inside South Africa, among the various communities inside South Africa, the various institutions inside South Africa, toward this goal. And this is, again, not something that happens overnight. You can't push a button and then that reality exists. It's something that we have to keep doing to get more and more people on board that South Africa needs macro-political change. The fourth point is international awareness abroad, about the situation in South Africa through, for example, these campaigns that I've mentioned. And what we need to achieve with this is international recognition of what is happening in South Africa, but also international, and more importantly, international recognition that our pursuit to change what is happening in South Africa is a legitimate pursuit and one that is worth supporting. And just over the last few months, we have all made tremendous progress in raising international support and international recognition, at least, of the crisis in South Africa. People know there's a problem in South Africa, but people need to take the next step to say that there are people who are committed to changing things, and those people ought to be supported. That is a very important aspect of the work of Lex Libertas. And then the fifth point is to channel this awareness or this recognition into tangible action, which includes governmental action through diplomatic pressure, practical support, and so forth. And there's a lot that foreign governments can do in terms of pressuring the South African government. But it also includes support in other ways, support by the general public, support in the forms of whether it's people sending emails to their representatives, their senators, and so forth, support in terms of NGOs, institutions, becoming involved, playing an active role, support in terms of podcasters and journalists and so forth, talking about this, coming to South Africa, doing documentary films, and also support in terms of corporations, various institutions becoming more actively involved. Now, each of these things by itself, each of these 5 points, wouldn't achieve much, but we are convinced that these 5 points as a collective, in other words, creating particular realities in South Africa that cannot be ignored, continually doing research about what a better system would look like to show that it's practical and it's feasible and it's realistic, raising support inside South Africa, among the various communities and nations in South Africa that this has to happen, raising support outside of South Africa in terms of international awareness and international recognition that things have to change, and fifthly, to channel this support into tangible action. We are convinced that if we do these 5 things as a collective, they become self-reinforcing. And as I explained in this recording that we'll publish tomorrow in more detail, think of it as a flywheel. The Jim Collins concept of a flywheel as the sort of the core around which a business is built. A flywheel is what is your core strategy, but the problem with a flywheel is at the beginning, at least, there's no movement, there's no momentum. And so what we need to do is to get this flywheel spinning. And to get a flywheel from not moving to moving slowly is very difficult. It takes a lot of effort. And that's why, at least from a corporate perspective, that's where a lot of startups give up, because they can't get their flywheel to start turning. I believe if this is thought of as a flywheel, we are somewhere between zero movement and slow movement, although I don't think, at least, we're not quite at zero movement. But in as far as this flywheel is turning, it's turning slowly. And it takes a lot of work to get a flywheel from turning slowly to moving faster. But to get it to turn faster is easier, at least, than to get it to start turning in the first place. And if we focus on these 5 things, and perhaps there are more things that we should do, and we could talk about that, and we would appreciate your input in that, I believe that we can start building momentum to get change, systemic change, that would be more sustainable. We don't believe in utopias. We don't believe that there's a button that we can push and everything would be fixed. we are convinced that there is no political solution as a result of which there would be no problems in South Africa. But the problems that we should have in South Africa should be the problems of people that have to take action, to do the work, to go down this path of prosperity, as opposed to the problem that we have today, which is that the government is preventing us from doing these things. And so we can either move forward or backwards. We cannot create an utopia where there's no problems, but we can make things better. And we know from history in South Africa and outside of South Africa that generally speaking, when people are able to govern themselves, when people have higher levels of autonomy, things tend to get better. Conversely, when people do not have that right, or at least when their God-given right to do this is not respected, when people are ruled over, things tend to get worse. And we need to work towards making things better. And I'm excited about this. It's an exciting path that lies ahead. And it's something that we are very committed to at Lex Libertas. And so I would like to encourage you to become involved. If you are not yet involved, either by supporting from a distance, if that is what you want to do, but also by becoming more actively involved with these different things that I've mentioned as a contributor at Lex Libertas. Thank you very much for watching, and we will publish more on this in the weeks to follow.